Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me for giving this lecture. I'm very happy to do this lecture. Also, if there are any questions, I guess please like feel free to interrupt in between. And I don't know how it works, raising your hand, or if you want to just speak, I guess that's also okay. And we can take some questions in the end as well. But feel free to stop in between and ask any clarification questions that you have. So let's get going. So the broad plan for today's lecture is to give you an overview of what deep learning is about, more than like trying to take you into details, like minute details that might be too much to process in this short 45-minute 1 hour lecture that I'm going to give. The idea is to convey like, hey, really, what is deep learning about, right? And what is the core idea that I need to know, so that I can get into deep learning research and try to understand papers and try to understand generally what people in this field are trying to do. So you had a lecture just last week where you learned what is machine learning. One second. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, yes, Ashwin, it's perfect.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I'll be admitting few people in between, so don't worry about that part. Okay, I'll take care of
Sounds
it.
sounds good. Yeah. Okay. So broadly, what are machine learning people doing? So they're trying to study algorithms that improve performance at some task. But more importantly, not just in any way, but by experience, in the sense that we keep getting data, and we want to infer, we want to infer how to do a certain task based on how we get these experiences. Uh, okay. So what is the difference between deep learning and machine learning, you might ask? So broadly, this is a term that we have been using for specific machine learning techniques, including, let's say, representation learning, neural networks, and even unsupervised or reinforcement learning methods. I'm assuming you had a brief introduction into what neural networks are, and maybe even some unsupervised methods. Representation learning is something that I'll be introducing you to today. That is a very core principle behind deep learning, and reinforcement learning is something that we would be, doing in one of the next lectures. But anyways, broadly, whenever these concepts are involved, you can see people saying deep learning, right? So let's explore some ideas of what people think when they mean deep learning, right? So the first idea that comes is compositionality. So basically, it says that, okay, I have one simple module. Now, can I put all these modules together and try to create something more complex, right? So, for example, you have a linear classifier in which you have just one layer of weights, right? So, can I have multiple layers of weights that I can stack up? And can I create a more complex function that I can learn? Right? The other notion of thinking about deep learning is in the form of end-to-end learning. So I'll get to this in more detail, but here essentially, uh, you might have seen in the machine learning context that you're given a feature set with like some x, right? And then you learn weights that add on top of this x and give you the final answer, right? Here we assume that we don't even have features, right? So if I'm trying to do image classification, excuse me. So if I'm trying to do image classification, someone gives me features of these images, right? And using that, I predict whether the image is like a dog or a cat or something like that, right? So in the deep learning scenario, I assume that these features are not given to me, and I'm instead just given the image. So I learn features that are useful to me, as opposed to somehow creating these features or getting these features like from someone. And the final notion that it is interesting is the distributed representation. So very close to the end-to-end learning perspective, where you say that, okay, uh, there are multiple neurons, and each neuron tries to encode something about the input, here the image, and in this process, the multiple neurons kind of work together to fire the classifier. So let's say we have a neural network and there are multiple layers and multiple neurons in each of these. So we just say that, okay, this part of the network learns to fire whenever it sees a face. This part of the network fires whenever it sees a tail, and so on, right? So basically, when all these fire together, I can classify that this is a dog and this is a cat or whatever that we're trying to do, right? So that is the notion of distributed representations. So let's go in some more depth into each of these. So one thing that has been so you can see, right, let's just go to vision. So you have pixels, and pixels form an edge, and text on, motif, and so on. Finally you get object. Multiple objects can be there in an image, and so on, right? Similarly, if you take speech, you have individual samples which are the equivalent of pixels, and then they can form like you getting samples corresponding to frequency, which can form a spectral band, a format, and so on. Like finally, a phone, and you have a word as like a basic unit of speech processing. And similarly, in NLP, you would have words, right? So mm, how do you capture this, or does it can this be reflected in a neural or a machine learning sense? So how do we do this? So let's say I give you a library of functions, right? So you have cosine, sine, logarithm, like a bunch of these functions. So I can use all these together to create a complicated function, right? So let's see this, right? So you have a composition which is like g1 of g2 of so on till g of n of x, right? So essentially, what I'm doing is that I'm stacking a bunch of these functions together, like in a composition, so that I can create a much more complicated function, right? So like I can create something like this, right? So why do we need this, right? Last time you might have seen that we had a linear classifier, right? So a linear classifier, what does it mean? It means that the decision boundary that is separating two classes is linear, right? So it might not always be the case. There might be more complicated situations where the decision boundary is not just linear and can be highly nonlinear. So in this case, we can create multiple functions, more complicated functions that capture this, irregular decision boundary. So yeah, so finally, if you can see, what we're interested is that any sort of graph, right? So basically, just to drive the point, it need not be something like sequential that builds this, but as long as you have an input and any graph, right, where each of the black boxes that I show here is like some function, right? I can combine that in any way, and finally, I can get an output, and that is fair game as far as deep learning is concerned. I'll tell you why. We have a way in which we can train all any such complicated setup, and that is the reason this is fair game, and we'll come to that. Yeah. So now let us study the next notion, which is like deep learning is. Oh, yeah. Okay. Let's see an example, right? So we had an image, and then finally the object that we got was a car. So let's fill in the details, right? So you have like a low level feature, which could be like, edges and so on, and mid level features, which would be parts, high level features, and like finally, you train a classifier which says, okay, if I see tires and if I see windows, blah, 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 then it's a car, right? So low level features look like this, mid level features, high level features, and finally you feel like you might be recognizing some of these objects and so on, right? So in fact, that whatever you're seeing here, these visualizations, they're not random. They're coming from a neural network itself. So these are like you're seeing like visualizations from the first, second, and third layer of a neural network. Basically, as the layers increase, you can see that the neural network is trying to learn more advanced concepts, right? So in fact, if you notice the first part, you can see it's just like more or less like blobs or colors and patterns. In the second one, you can see like some edges and textures that are appearing there. And in the third one, if you can notice, you can see that maybe you can notice a beak, something like a steering wheel, and so on, right? So these are like high level features that the neural network has learned. So as you can see, one can say that like an image is has multiple hierarchical decompositions, right? So you have an image that can go to an object, and it can go to an edge, and finally pixels, right? So this notion of hierarchical decomposition is what a neural network captures when we say we have like a multiple layered neural network. um, right. So so let's go ahead with the next view of what deep learning is. So one thing that I want to say is that all these views are more or less like very intricately connected to each other, and these are just putting it in these three ways just like makes it slightly clearer, and like but ideally you want to take all of these as like being very intricately connected to each other. Right. So how did traditional machine learning work? So you did this in the last lecture. So here you, just to give you a recap, you have some input which can be an image, a sentence, in the case of NLP, or like some speech signal, right? So and then what happens is that you get features, right? So so for image you have like SIFT or hog features and so on, right? And for speech you have MFCC. So let's what do these things mean, right? Like so essentially there are like some transformations of the input signal that you do. For example, in the case of speech, you take the Fourier transform of the speech signal broadly, and you get the spectrum, and on the spectrum you apply your favorite classifier and you get the results, right? So now the question is, you might ask, like, how did you know that you have to take the Fourier transform and not something else, maybe not wavelet transforms, right? That's a good question. So that's what we mean by handcrafted features. So by handcrafted, there is no way we can know that these are good things. We believe that they can be useful, and we try it out. Many people try out multiple features, and whatever works best across multiple tasks, people say that that is a good feature for this task, right? So that's what we mean by handcrafted. Like basically there's a person who looks at multiple features, who designs these features so that they can be slightly better, and so on, right? So can we do something better is what deep learning asks. That is the question that deep learning asks, right? So in fact, at one point of time, feature engineering by itself was like a huge field. Like people tried to find what is the best feature for image classification, for speech tasks, and so on, right? So that is the part that got kind of taken away with deep learning, right? So let's do this simple thing. So here you have the image, and you extracted like some fixed one second, sorry. You just extracted some fixed feature, like handcrafted features. Like let's say you're doing a project on vision, right? So someone will tell you that, hey, if you're doing vision, then I think SIFT are good features. SIFT is like a very popular image feature extract method. So someone will tell you that this is a good feature, and you just like go to a standard library, extract these features from an image, and you do some sort of unsupervised method on top of it, and then you just like run a classifier to get whether it's a car or whatever, right? You get this classification. So essentially you can see that the classifier is the only part that is being learned. Everything else is being is more or less fixed, right? Someone told you what to do, and how did they find out? By experimentation. They found out that this is the best feature that works. So what deep learning does is that it moves this curve, right? So I don't want to bother trying to find the right feature. It's too much work. I don't want to do any of this work and learn a classifier on top of it and so on. So I just move the entire learning pipeline right at the input, right? Yeah. So the input is car, and I have a bunch of parameters which I can learn, and can I do something and finally get the classifier output as the answer, right? So that is what we mean by end-to-end learning, which is the second perspective that we take here. So okay, now just to get to the terminology that we are using, which is like deep learning. So that this is where it comes from. Like what is a shallow model versus what is a deep model, right? So well, just make sure that we mean traditional machine learning in some sense when we mean shallow, and deep learning would mean just that you have a more hierarchical or more layers that form, this whole pipeline, right? So you can see, right, with the shallow models, you have handcrafted feature extractor and a simple, I don't know why this is not coming into format. Anyways, nevertheless, you can see that the handcrafted feature extractor, and then you have a simple trainable classifier. Here, that would be like, like an SVM or whatever, any of the linear classifiers would do. But unlike that, a deep model would basically mean that you don't have a handcrafted feature extractor, but you have a trainable feature extractor, which we will get to in a bit. But for now, you can just assume that it's a linear transformation, right? Or right, like basically we have some weights that apply on the image, and then you get something an intermediate output, right? So what we call is that at every after every transformation, the output that you get, we call that like the internal representation, right? So it's very common for people to take the pre-final layer, like basically just before the output. So it would be one of these inputs, to use this output of the neural network as like the feature for this image, right? Like instead of using a handcrafted feature like SIFT, you use one of these things, right? And finally, based on this, you have a classifier, and you get the correct answer. So that is the fundamental difference between shallow and deep model, right? So we are done with two ideas of what deep learning looks like. The first one is that there can be hierarchical compositional models. And the next one is that the learning has been pushed in the sense that now instead of having features and then learning sitting on top of feature extraction, even the feature extracting part is learned right now. So everything between the input and the output is being learned in deep learning as opposed to traditional machine learning. So let's get to the final part, which is distributed representations. So what is happening here? So one second. So the good thing about distributed representation is that you can have a vector that denotes each entity that we are interested in, right? So for example, we want to do something like this. So United States to dollar, and what does Mexico go to, right? So if we can do the same operation, basically do the vector operation from United States to dollar, which are both points in some space, in some two-dimensional space, right? So if I do this distance, then I should be getting I should be going to the point which corresponds to the currency of Mexico, right? So basically, that is what a distributed representation means. So for every entity that we're interested in, can we have a vector representation, right? For example, you have the image, like the image with a car and whatnot, right? So can we pass it through like a bunch of layers, and can we get a representation of a car, right? A representation as in, it's like, maybe like a 100 length vector, like a 100-dimensional vector that corresponds to that particular image, right? And why do we want this? So that we can compute similarity, right? So if I'm building a car classifier, what I would do is that I take two images, get their representations, and compare the similarity, right? And I know that one is a car, in which case, if I compute the similarity and it's highly similar, okay, by computing the similarity, I just mean that you take the angle, or you take the L2 distance, or whatever between these two 100-dimensional vectors, right? So once I do this, I want to know that, like, if the similarity is very high, I can assign the same class to both of them, right? So that's why we like to have these distributed representations. They allow us to do cool things as well, like, as you see, some of these analogical tasks that are purely based on just like embedding a bunch of these words into like a single dimensional space, and you can now compute, add and subtract these vectors with that give you different meanings. So yeah, so just to wrap up this, what is notion of deep learning. So you have like these three ideas that we just went over. So why would you want to do deep learning? So I guess the single most interesting answer that anyone can give you is better performance. So in the recent past, like I would say maybe from 2012, 2013, we have seen that deep models have become uh, very common in multiple tasks across like image, NLP, take the domain, it doesn't matter. So in all of these cases, deep learning models have been achieving phenomenal success. Just to give you context, the whole deep learning era kind of began with like one contest where image classification was being solved. Deep learning models outperformed machine learning models by a huge margin, and we made like progress that was like unheard of in a one single year, and that started the whole interest here, right? So the other thing that helps is basically coming from the second perspective, which is end-to-end learning, right? So now you don't need domain experts. So it's very easy to get into a field and try to get good performance as opposed to having expertise in that particular data, right? For example, today if I wanted to do RGBD images, right? D would be depth, or some new feature that I've never worked with before. I don't need to have expertise in that. Okay, why do I need expertise? The fundamental reason for having expertise is so that I can extract features, and these features are useful, right? An expert knows that, hey, this is a good feature to have, that can help you build a good classifier, right? So that need is being taken away because I say that, hey, give me the input. I'm just like going to have my deep learning model take the input, and now I'm just going to get the output because I can learn these features I can figure out what is important and what is not important, right? Basically, as I train this model, that is being learned. So, okay, now let's see, how does one train a deep network? And more importantly, uh, I want to focus on how do you train one layer as opposed to training the entire deep network. Because once you learn how to train one layer, it's just a matter of putting everything together, right? And getting the whole system into place. So what is happening, right? So you can see this black box. Let's think of that as like one layer. So the black box gets X as an input and Z is the output. And theta are the parameters that are used to map X to C, right? So, and the key computation while going back is backprop. So what is backprop? So here you're getting the gradients as the feedback, right? So dl by dz is basically the gradient, which is telling that like, hey, you incurred a loss of L, and if you change z a bit, and this is the gradient that you're going to get, right? So you can use that gradient to compute the gradient with respect to the parameters and gradient with respect to the input itself, which is X, right? So you use dl by d theta to update the parameters of this layer itself, and dl by dx becomes the input. Becomes the gradient feedback that you pass to the previous layer that was before this black box, right? And trivially, if this was the input layer itself, there's nothing much to do because you don't want to update the input because that would make no sense. So how does this work when you put it together? So you have the first network. So you get the input and it computes its thing and passes it on to the next layer and then to the next layer, right? And after this, you're doing a classification and then you get a loss, which says like, hey, whether your classifier was correct or not. And you can do it with multiple, loss functions that you might have encountered like in the previous lecture, like, right? You can have an L2 loss or you can have cross entropy loss or whatever, that suits the task. And based on the loss, you get gradients, right? And the gradient, based on the gradients, now you can compute gradients with respect to the parameter and update the parameters of this particular block. And then you can also pass gradients with respect to the input at this layer to the previous layer and so on. And in this way, I updated all my 3 layers in this process. So how do I update this? So we are mostly interested in updating the parameters, right? Because we're training the neural network, and that is just done using gradient descent or its variant, right? I'm just skipping over a gradient descent because I just assume that part of it was covered in the previous lecture on machine learning. Okay, now let us look at an example, right? So the each of the black boxes here, let's say we replace them with like certain operators, which are very simple and very familiar to us, right? So you have x and y being multiplied, and z and w being, you have a max operator, right? And then you add these results and finally multiply that by 2, right? That is the function that we have here. One thing that you should notice is that none of these operators have parameters. Like theta is not involved. So we are just going to see how forward and backward pass works here. Right? So let's do this. So if I do the forward pass, you can see that, like, x and y are being multiplied. So I get minus 12, and I take a max between 2 and minus 1. So I get 2, and I add both of these and finally multiply that by 2. And that's my final output, right? So let's see how this works in the backward flow. So let's say I did some loss, and one was my gradient that came back with respect to the loss, right? So the way it would work is that I reverse engineer. So I get something was multiplied by 2. So you can see that the gradient will be multiplied by the same factor as well, right? And with addition, how does it work, right? So addition is basically, it just distributes the gradient, right? So it just says like, hey, I'm just like, the both of them get equal share of the gradient. It just like goes to both inputs of the graph, right? And what is a max gate? So you should notice that in the max, only the contribution of z mattered, and the contribution of w did not matter at all. So that's exactly what happens. So all the gradient goes to z, and w gets no gradient, right? And what happens with multiplication? That is interesting, right? So you have a gradient of y going to gradient of going to x, and gradient of x going to y, right? So you can see here. So x is getting a gradient of -8, which is 2 times -4. 2 is the gradient magnitude that was that was obtained at this layer, and that is being multiplied by the value of y, and the same vice versa is happening with x, right? So which is y is getting a gradient of 6, which is like 2 times the value of x, which is 3, right? And that is like very reasonable. If you just like take out your notebook and you just do gradient of, like, let's say x1 w1 plus x2 w2, and calculate gradients with respect to the weights corresponding to x and y, you get this very basic differentiation. So what is happening? So you get an input, and you have some graph, and finally you get like some loss, and for corresponding to the loss you keep getting gradients. And the way it works is that wherever you have a branch, the gradient just adds up, right? And in other places it gets distributed according to what that particular graph was doing. In case of a max, it just directed to the node that contributed to the most, and in case of addition, it's just like distributed. And if it's a multiplication module, it's just like gets switched. So let's see what a linear classifier is. So like, you have an image, and you have a parameters which is like w, right? So how is w and b, in fact? So how are they being used? You have f of x comma w, which is like wx plus b, right? Which is a linear classifier, a linear transformation. And then you get 10 numbers, because, like, let's say w is like 10 cross 3072. Why do we need 10 numbers? Because I guess here we were doing a 10 class classification, right? So you get 10 numbers which correspond to the class score, right? That is your classifier output. Um, so this would work. How would this work? So you have an image, and then you have W, right? So the bias is being added. You have the pixels. These are the pixel values that correspond to the image, and then you multiply that with W, and you finally get a bunch of scores, and you just select whichever is the maximum one as, like, the correct answer. And what changed from linear classifiers to deep networks? You can see the definition, right? So linear score function, you just had W times X, but right now what we have is like, okay, there is W2 times max of 0 comma W1 comma X, W1X, right? So you can see that it's not just like a new layer, but there's also a non-linearity, like a max that sits in here, right? So just to go to the grounded in the image, you have X, which is like, the input that you're getting. You have a weight that operates on it. So you have one layer. And then you have a new feature that you get, which is like much smaller than the original input. And that is passed through like, some sort of nonlinearity. It can be a max, it can be, various other features. Max, again, you should think that this is not a max of 100 features, right? It's a max between 0 and that value. So it's a point-wise nonlinearity. So each output from this first layer is passed through a nonlinear layer. Like you can have a squared, whatever, right? And then you get the next layer, so which is W2, and finally you get like 10 numbers which correspond to the classes that you're interested in, like plane, car, whatever, right? Excuse me. So yeah, great. So now that we are kind of understand what is deep learning, which is the first part, and we kind of understand how back propagation can be used to train these networks, where even when they're even when you have multiple layers stacked up, right? Now I think it's a critical juncture to just like take a break, and if you have any questions, this would be like the right time before I go into discussing two very important deep learning architectures, which are like CNNs, convolutional neural networks, and recurrent networks. Are there any questions that you would?
Maybe Ashwin, just for a break. See,
Yeah.
uh, see, machine learning, if you see, traditionally we will classify supervised, unsupervised learning and reinforcement learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you say that deep learning is or deep learning, so would you put into the machine learning, or you would say this is a separate branch?
Certainly not. I would say that machine learning is like I would say deep learning is a way of doing machine learning.
Yeah.
So right. So deep learning is just like the only thing that is changing is that we are doing the same stuff in the sense that you're going from input to output with data. Just that we are now doing it in a specific way, in the sense that you have hierarchical, multiple layers that come into picture, and you're moving the learning completely to the network, right? We don't have any feature extractions and so on that is happening.
Yeah.
So in that,
So like you want to say that, see, in traditional, like if we take example of computer vision, so
yeah.
you have either line or Harris detector type of things, or you have a like maybe binary features, and
Mhm.
then we may solve the correspondence problem and then infer about some things. So
Exactly.
the whole learning has been now come to the input. We don't have to worry what feature will be also will get trained, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Uh,
Exactly. Yeah.
Now all things is that how hyperparameters, like when I say hyperparameters, I think you implies me all weights, right?
Exactly. Right. For example, here you can see, right, like you can see like the W1 is going from 3072 to 100, right?
Uh,
So instead of 100, you could have chosen 200 as well. It's
uh,
an arbitrary number.
uh.
So these are the hyperparameters that you want to play, you want to tune so that you get the best performance.
And the second, do we learn about which function we have to put? That
Um, Yes. In this particular talk, I'm not going to focus a lot on that,
uh,
but there are many standard architectures. So, for example, the max function is like I would say the most commonly used function. It is called a ReLU function,
yes.
right? So,
Mm.
I'm not going to talk a lot about those things in this particular lecture, but the thing is that people have played a lot with these architectures, and there are fairly standard versions of these architectures that one can use.
Okay, thanks. So I think let's now move to the
Yeah, thank
next
you.
part.
Yeah,
Mm.
cool. So let's now discuss like two important deep learning networks, which are like CNNs and recurrent neural networks. Um, these are particularly interesting because they try to model different kinds of inputs, and they have seen considerable success in some of the recent tasks that have been around. So you might have seen a fully connected layer is just like another way of saying what a linear layer is. So it takes each of the input, and for each corresponding input, you have a unique weight, right? So if I have an example which is like, an image which is like 200 cross 200, there are basically 40k inputs, right? 40k inputs corresponding to each pixel. Then I will have 40k weights corresponding to each 40k cross 40k a matrix, a W matrix that corresponds to that, so that I can do a matrix multiplication with this input, right? That would be a fully connected or a linear layer. So you can see that I'm going to have like a lot of parameters, right? Is there some simpler way? That is one of the questions that CNN tries to answer, right? So one way I could do is like local connections instead of having connectivity everywhere, right? Can I do something like a, for one portion of the image I have a certain set of weights, right? So that can lead to a significant reduction of weights, right? So you can see that, like, for the top of the image I have certain weights, for the bottom I have a certain different set of weights, and so on, right? So this way I'm not scaling to like a 40k cross 40k, but like much smaller set of weights, right? Yeah. So the next assumption that I make is of stationarity. What do I mean by that? Is that okay? Uh, so the statistics, or like, things generally are smooth, or that there need not there is no need for me to think of a bottom of an image to be very different from the top of the image, and so on, right? Um, that is exactly what a convolutional layer does. So you can see that, here I had different colors focusing on different portions of the image. I replaced that as well, and now I have local networks, a weight that looks only at a part of the image at one point of time, but it goes from looking at one point to the other point at my simultaneously, right? So I share parameters. That's what we call this. So parameters, basically the weights, are shared. So, and you have the same parameter looking at small portions of the image as opposed to one huge weight that that sort of dealt with the entire input, right? So let's just see what convolutions are. Convolutions, if you come from a signal processing perspective, it would just mean like, you convolve, so to speak. Like you have a filter and you do this convolution operation. So as you can see, right, like it's basically if you have f of x and if you have g of x, it's basically looks like very close to an integral, right? From you can see from the image. So to be clearer, right? So this is how it would work. So let's like go like kind of have an animated version of how a convolution layer would work, right? So I have a filter. So the filter is denoted with the brown matrix here, right? So the green is the image, which is the input, and the blue features that you see are like are the representation that I'm extracting at the next layer, right? So the filter kind of operates on like the first 3 cross 3 matrix of the input image, right? You can see that essentially what I'm doing is that I'm just doing a linear combination, which is like the first number of the filter operates with the first number of the image segment, and the second one multiplies that, and finally I add all of that to get one number, right? So that is what is happening here. So, and similarly, it operates with multiple portions of the image, right, in this fashion, and fills out what is the next layer, right? So this is how I compute the next layer, and this operation essentially is what we are going to refer as a convolution. So instead of having a fully connected layer, in which case this matrix would be 6 cross 6, you have a 3 cross 3 matrix that operates on segments of the input and finally gives us a bunch of numbers, right? So the notion in convolution layer is that you learn multiple filters, right? So multiple filters would give you multiple image representations like this. So you would have multiple blue features corresponding to multiple filters, right? So what does a filter do? A filter you can think of as being excuse me. Yeah. So a filter is, you can think of it as being a detector, where it says like, hey, I'm going to have a detector for an edge. I'm going to have a detector for something else, right? So that's exactly what you can think of filter as. So I can learn multiple filters, and I can get, so let's see how a convolutional layer is working. So you have, let's say, an image which is like 32 cross 32, and the depth is basically RGB, for example, and you have like three matrices of 32 cross 32. So I have a 5 cross 5 cross 3 filter. So basically for each channel, I have one filter, and the size of the filter is just 5 cross 5, right? I convolve with these two things. So how do I do that? I slide my filter over each segment of the input, right? And by slide, I mean that at every point I compute, I multiply each number in the filter with each number in the image, and add all of that, right? Exactly like how an integral would work. Right. So one just point is that the filters both need to have the same depth as the input volume. So right. So just to give you an example here, you can see that you just each filter is basically is like a W transpose X plus P, exactly like a linear layer, but just that it is operating on a smaller portion of the input. So I convolve that, and I finally get an activation map. So, well, activation map is just like a jargon that is used for like the intermediate representation. And this is just, I used one filter and I got 28 cross 28 cross 1, right? Like the depth is just 1 because I just used one filter so far. Oops, sorry. Yeah. So I can use multiple filters, and I'll get multiple, excuse me. Yeah, I can use multiple filters, and I'll get multiple activation maps, right? So usually it's very common that you have like a large number of activation maps. So I can use multiple filters, and I get multiple intermediate representations, so to speak, if not activation maps. So in this way, I get a new image, so to speak, where the size is 28 cross 28, and you have like I use 6 filters in, and therefore the depth is 6. Let's see how a convnet would look like. So you have an input image, and then you pass it through a convolutional layer, like just as we discussed. It gives you a 28 cross 28 cross 6 input representation. And then I have a ReLU. So you might recall that ReLU is just the max operator that I mentioned initially. Instead of a ReLU, you can always have any other nonlinearity, or you can even not have it. It's okay, right? So there's a ReLU layer that goes after the convolution layer, and I get one input activation map, or intermediate representation, and I can have much more. So exactly like what we did before, right? So you have multiple linear layers. Instead of that, you now have multiple convolutional layers, and finally you get a representation on top of which you do a classifier. One second. Yeah. Any questions with how ReLU, the convolution works, or any other thing with the CNNs? Cool. Let's go ahead. So you might have seen right now, so that we dealt with specific kind of inputs. So let's see what are the problems with these well, by MLPs I just mean linear perceptrons, but we can broadly include neural networks, like linear neural networks, and even CNNs. So what is the problem? The problem is that they cannot model sequences, right? Even fixed size inputs and outputs. That is one issue, right? I have to specify that my image is going to be 32 cross 32 cross 3 beforehand, and it does not have any notion of temporal structure, right? The second problem is that it's a completely feed forward. So what do you mean by feed forward? Let's just go back. So you can see that it just like goes from input to output. There's nothing else. So by problem 2 is that there's no memory, or in a more simpler sense, there is no feedback, right? So just to tell you about why sequences are important, right? You might be doing right? Like if you just like see these two things, and if I ask you what do you see, you'd be confused, right? You would not know what to do. But if I give you some more context, these make sense, right? You can see that this looks like R and C, right? And maybe this is like some word like brace or something. Or you might be doing forensics, or like matching signatures, or trying to understand a word and so on, right? So if I just give you this squibble, you will not know what this is, but if you see the whole world, you know that maybe this is defense, right? So sequences are everywhere. You always want to do that. So you have language, you have speech. They're all essentially sequences, right? So here you have the example of machine translation. You have a sentence that's going from German to English. So the other important thing to note is that there can be sequences when you even don't expect a sequence, right? So as you can see here, maybe there's a particular way in which you want to parse an image, or like, for example, in the example that you see, right, two is written in a certain way, and that is the sequence that we are interested in, right? So if you're trying to learn how to write these numbers, then there is a specific way in which you probably want to process these images, as opposed to just like in the matrix where like you go left to right and top down. So excuse me. So sequences can go sequences where do you want sequences in the input, or do you want sequences in the output, right? So you can have just like one to one, which is exactly what we studied before, which is like a linear network. Or you can have this where you have you the input is not a sequence, but as you go further you get multiple outputs. There's a temporal structure in the output space. Or you have temporal structures in the input space, but you have the output is just like one thing. So let's ground this with examples, right? So the first one can be just like image classification, right? I give you an image and you give me a label, right? So let's do one to many, which is a very popular example would be image captioning. So I give you an image and you have to give me one caption, like one sentence that describes the image, right? So the red input box would be the image. You do a bunch of processing and you output a sentence, which is like a sequence of words. And what is many to one? Many to one would be something like sentiment classification, right? Like I give you a sentence, you want to tell whether it is a positive sentiment or negative sentiment, right? And finally, the bigger thing would be many to many, which is like you're given a sequence and the output is a sequence as well. So as I said, as I pointed before, machine translation is a very good example, right? So the input is like a sequence of English words and the output is a sequence of German words. Okay, so based on what we have learned so far, which is like what did we learn? We learned what are feed-forward networks, and we learned how to learn the parameters basically by passing the gradient. Whenever I have a layer which is composed with multiple other layers, how do I learn, right? So let's use these two ideas and let's use these ideas that we have learned and see how we can handle sequences, right? So the first is parameter sharing. So what is it doing? So basically, if I have multiple, if I have nodes that are branching out, and whenever they get gradient, I just have to add them. That is exactly what parameter sharing is telling us, right? For example, in the convolutional network case, you had one filter acting on multiple portions of the images, right? So which means that that filter gets gradients from all operations that it did so far. Basically, from all portions of the image, it gets a gradient, right? So that's exactly what we mean by parameter sharing. And the next one is called unrolling. This is a new idea. So let's see this, right? So you have st is like some function of the parameters theta of the previous sequences, st minus 1, right? So you see that at each step, st is taking input as st minus 1, and it is getting maybe some new input, which is xt, right? And at each step, we are sharing parameters. So st minus 1 gets this is processed by the same parameters theta as st and st plus 1 and so on, right? Now, if I write it this way, right? You can see how the self loop that I have between S2 itself is now replaced in this unrolled fashion, right, at each time step. And now this is something that we are very familiar with. This is nothing but our feed forward structure, right? So I have basically unrolled my recurrent model, which basically goes for infinity to a finite length, right? Basically, some capital T length, and now this is exactly like a feed forward neural network as far as I'm concerned, right? So now we can put these two together and we can model sequences, right? So what are the advantages? Now I can model arbitrary sequence lengths. So basically, if I have a sequence length, which is of length 100, so I basically unroll 100 times so that I can model the entirety of it, right? And the other important thing is that because I'm doing parameter sharing, I have a smaller, yeah. Did someone have a question?
I think by mistake someone unmute.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, so what is the advantage? So because we're doing parameter sharing in the sense that each step is being processed by the same set of parameters, I only have just one parameter, which is like theta, that handles all time steps. So I have a small number of parameters as well. So let's just see what this is doing. So I get an input and I have an RNN, which is like a recurrent neural network, right? And finally I predict some this processing happens for some time steps, and I predict a vector right. So here you have to really take both x and y as like sequences, or depending on what task you're doing, right? So you get a new state which is ht, and that is a function of the network. W is basically my parameters, and the input is ht minus 1, which is like the previous state based on like all everything that happened till, yeah.
Could you go to the maybe couple of slides back?
Sure.
Yes. So is it a typo, or this is because here x and st minus 1 is there also, right? Or it's right? The graph, which unfolded graph. Because, okay, st minus 1 f theta, it is giving st. Okay. So this x is a what? Or something's parameter, or?
No, x is basically the optional input that you can get at every time step.
Okay.
Like you can think of it as like some observation, right, that I make.
Okay, so this is a sum
No.
of okay, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, xt minus 1 is like some observation, and s or h is basically my internal memory of the entire sequence.
Okay, so if in other way I can assume s is like a kind of state, and xt
Yeah,
could be observation.
exactly, that is correct.
Correct, no? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
basically, at after every time step, my state is updating based on the parameters theta, and I get a new input, which is like a new observation, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So like let's say I'm doing translation, right? So xt minus 1, xt, and xt plus 1 would be new words, right? And then st minus 1 would be my internal state, and basically st plus 1 would represent my all the entire sentence, right? For example, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Uh, uh, right. So basically what I'm telling is very simple. So the new state that I get is basically a function of the old state, which is ht minus 1, and any new observation I might get, right? So the observation is completely optional. I might have an observation at every time step, I might not have, right? It depends on the task that I'm trying to solve, but to be general, basically this is the formulation of how a recurrent neural network would work. Important disclaimer again, which is the same function is being used at every time step, and that is the reason we have like few parameters in this whole process. Let's just see what people call a vanilla recurrent neural network, which is like the simplest instantiation of a RNN, right? So you have ht equals fw, where w is the parameters, and it just like recursively uses the previous state and the current observation. All right. So give you a specific instantiation of what FW looks like. So HT is like you can use a tanh function for the nonlinearity, and then you have one set of weights that basically takes that HT minus one, and another set of weights that linearly operates on the input and some bias term, right? So there is like a very common instantiation of what the function f looks like, and W is essentially the parameters WHH and WXH. So, and finally, you get YT. YT is like the label or whatever the output that you're looking for. So the YT is now a function of the state, the final state, and you can have a bias, right? A bias term. Um, yeah. So let's look at how the computational graph looks here. So, right. So you have H0, which is like the initial internal state. It goes through FW, and you're getting an observation X1 as well, and you compute H1, which is like the state at time step one, and that goes to the next one. The same process applies, exactly whatever happened in the previous time step. It's essentially a self loop, but I'm just unrolling it because we want to see how the graph works, right? And finally I do this, and finally I get a representation which is H capital T. H capital T, like for example, if I'm doing I don't know, navigation, right? X1, X2, X3 would be all observations that I see, and I have computed a representation of the entire trajectory that I followed so far. That would be the representation of H. That would what HT would mean, right? And now you can see that this is no more like a sequential or a recursive structure. It's exactly like what we did before, and you can always compute some loss with respect to the final representation H capital T, like a classification loss or a L2 loss or whatever, and backpropagate gradients just like how we did last time, right? Which we know for every layer you can go back and update those weights with respect using the rules of the computational graph. And you should see that the most important part, which as I mentioned, that W is being shared every time. So just like how it happened with parameter sharing in convolutional networks, W get gradients from all of these time steps. So basically, every interaction updates W, right? I add gradients coming from each time step, and the entire sum of all these gradients at each time step is used to update my W. Just to drop a name here, this method is known as backpropagation through time. So just a variant. So if I have an output being produced at each time step, so let's say I have y1, y2, right? So this is exactly, for example, how machine translation would look, right? I have x1 as the input, and after I see h1, I output y1. Y1 is like maybe the next word, right? And in the target sentence, like maybe German or something like that, right? So in this case, I will have a loss with respect to each y1, y2, y3, and so on, right? So now how would this work? W is now updated based on the loss coming from y1, coming from y2, and all of these. Just that y2 passes through W twice, y3 passes through W thrice, and so on, right? So it gets the loss from the entire computational graph. So basically, you have to come back all the way to W, right? That's how the graph would work, right? So you see L is the final loss that is being computed, and L comes to the gradient flows from L to L1 and L1 to Y1, and like basically W, and or in the case of L2 it would be passing through W twice, right? If you see this how the graph structure looks like. Yeah, and finally this is the instantiation of one to many, right? Basically, I'm just like trying to show you how it works with multiple instantiations of recurrent neural networks, right? So here, this is a good example for image captioning, right? So X is just an image input, and the output is a caption, which is like a sequence y1, y2, y3, yt. So here, it exactly works the same way. Once you see the computational graph, it's very easy to understand how the gradient flow works. Uh, let's spend a little more time on trying to understand sequence to sequences. Sequence to sequence is like probably the most complicated and the most used kind of version of RNN as well. Another generalized version of thinking about these problems is known as encoder decoder. So encoder basically encodes the input sequence, and the decoder basically decodes, and it's also a recurrent neural network. It decodes the output one by one. Excuse me.
Sir,
Yeah,
yeah, as our state is progressing with time, uh,
yeah.
I wonder what is the use of updating the weights of previous time stamps.
Uh, right. So one thing is that you have to understand, like, the weights are the same. Right. The same weight is being used to go from H0 to H1, and the same weight is being used to go from H1 to H2. So it automatically gets updated.
Okay, so it's an evolution of weight matrix.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you,
Right.
sir.
We just right now the way we are looking at it is that we just broke down the recurrent structure into just like a finite time sequence, right? Otherwise, it's basically
Okay,
it can go forever.
okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. So yeah, so let's look at this part. So basically, many to one, which is like
Maybe
yeah,
I'll maybe this would clarify, because see, now when you're doing the unrolling, it
yeah,
appears that it's uh, uh, that FW comes sequentially, right? So
yeah,
if I was doing the, like, it's a kind of, you can say, for or infinite loop. So if
yeah,
you are backtracking each time, you would update, right? Huh?
exactly.
But
Yes.
if I represent FW, so FW get updated only once, or it will get updated as you backtrack every time.
As you backtrack every time. Exactly. Yes.
So that means if it's I have it t times, it will get update t times, right?
Three times. Exactly. Correct. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So only
Yeah.
things now it's clearly, it's a neat and clean, right?
Yes, exactly. Now it's exactly for what we are doing instead of the recurrent structure, which is like a more general version, right?
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for the questions. Yeah. Right. So like let's now look at sequence to sequence, which is like, right. So what is happening? I encode the input sequence. So it can be like a sequence in English, right? So I'm getting x1, x2, x3 are words, and fw is the same parameter that is being shared. So I'm just writing it out. So basically, I encode the entire sequence and I get ht, which is like ht is the state that represents the entire sentence, right? And now based on this, I want to output, right? So HT is now the input to another neural network, which is taking HT as like the 0th state, so to speak, and it is outputting as it goes, y1, y2, and this is just an instantiation of one to many RNN, right? And y1, y2 correspond to different words in the target domain, right? And here, usually what people do is that you have a different W that maps the decoder. So the second part, which is the one to many, is a different neural network, and the first part, which is many to one, is another neural network. So typically, these are, you call the first one as the encoder, which maps the input sequence to one representation, and you have a decoder which maps the input representation to another sequence of outputs, right? Um, let's see how this works. So you have inputs, which is like, let's say we are doing character level language modeling, right? So you are for HELLO, like we are learning this sequence. So each of these have a feature, very simple feature, which is like, just like a, basically, you have, it's like a unit vector, right? Like you have one corresponding to whichever feature was active. So here H would be the first feature, and so one is active there. So you have this kind of simple feature, and you have a hidden layer, right? So essentially, you can see that you have these, uh, the same thing goes in, you compute the HT, and right, like basically the function is just tan h times the HT minus one plus whatever the weight that corresponds to the input, and finally the bias, right? That is this computation that is being shown here. Yeah, okay. Just to summarize, so today I think gave broadly, like, what is deep learning and how it kind of differentiates from what machine learning is, and what is representations. By representations, I mean we kind of skipped the part where we don't have to have expertise and learn what good features are. So instead of that, the model directly does that for us. That is the representation learning part, right? So in fact, why is it called a representation? So we can just replace the image with that particular representation, right? Which is like the pre-final layer of the neural network, usually, like, the way people do it. And then we studied two popular architectures, which is like CNN and RNN, convolutional neural network and recurrent neural network. So what does it help us? So CNN is good when you're dealing with images, because of, like, so the assumptions that we made, which is like stationarity and so on. And finally, you have RNN, which is helps you model sequences, right? These two tools broadly, what did they have as the basis? And this is the basis for even more complex deep learning models and methods that have been proposed, which is the computational graph. As long as you can write a graph that goes from the input to output, and in between you have black boxes which you can differentiate through, you can always compute gradients and you can learn this, right? That is, as if I have to summarize deep learning in a succinct way, the whole approach, this would be that, right? The focus on the graph, basically go from input to the output in a series of operations, right? And make sure that each operation that you make is differentiable. And in that case, you can update all the parameters and you will be able to learn this function that goes from the input to the output, right? So yeah, I guess that brings us to the end of this lecture. Yeah, thanks a lot.